All right, so I'm going to try and do this just like I've been doing for the students. So it's kind of a test here. So we're going to look at Genesis 1:1, which is also kind of referred to as day one. So I'm going to pull up day one. This is Genesis 1 through 5. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So evening and morning were the first day. Now I'm reading from the New King James Version. And so let's break this down a little bit. I'm actually going to skip Genesis 1:1. You could just get into that really in so in depth, and I'm going to just kind of jump into this because I want to keep 1:1 alone and then work on the following verses. So this Genesis 1 verse 2 is fairly long, but I'm going to break it into two parts. So this part's the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and kind of the big thing I want to look at is some definitions and some ideas, because the big thing about Hebrew words is, again, there is a literal meaning most of the time, but almost all of the time there is a figurative meaning, a picture meaning, so to speak, to get an idea of. So just to look at some of this. So darkness or obscurity, and so it is on Strong's, it's 28:2. And so this is the concordance, darkness, night, obscurity. And if you look at what the figurative meaning of it is, so we're looking at this in the context of Genesis 1, the first day of creation. It says, figuratively, misery, destruction, death, ignorance, sorrow, wickedness, obscurity. So, when you're looking at this, it's like, well, wait a minute, there is some other things besides just it being dark. And just like that, if we also look at what the word, the deep, the abyss, the abuso, that's what is in Greek. But in this, it has this meaning of confusion. It says empty place, but it just means that it's waste product. There's nothing that's redeeming, really. But what I really want to look at is the descriptive term of it. As a surging mass of water, it's supposed to give this idea of this water that is coming up, but it represents confusion. It represents an emptiness and confusion. So when we look at that and we decide, well, what is the root word? Ooh, bad circle there. I ought to stick with the PowerPoint stuff. So if I take the root word, I put it up here. I say, all right, surging mass of water. The root word of that is to destroy, to move, to make noise, to ring again. It means like an uproar. Again, we're talking about this surging mass of water that is confusion, and it is just agitated and making noise. And even the root of that means to destroy. It's troubling. It's vex means to be troubled, to discomfort. So all of these lead to the idea of that word, the abyss, that we use the Greek word, but this word in Hebrew means this surging mass of water that represents confusion and discord and destruction. So kind of look at this again, and with that in your memory, think about some of this. So the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So when we look at this again, if we take this part in the way that, and I forget what app I use this, it's not the Blue Letter Bible that I use on my phone, but I think it's the Bible Hub. When you look at this and you break it down and you put Instead of the darkness, you put misery, destruction, death, ignorance, sorrow, wickedness. And in face of the deep, it's the noisy, destroying, surging mass of water. So the earth was formless and void. Misery and destruction and death was over the surface of this noising, surging mass of water. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the water. So we're looking at this part of it, the Spirit of God moving over the surface of the water. Waters mean a ton of things in the Bible, and right now I want us to think about it as a contrast to the surging mass of water. So there's this water within the waters that is building up, and that's what you look at when we take this and compare those two parts. So if I have this and I compare, the darkness was on the face of the deep and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the water. So we have two things that are on or over the face, and the two things that it's talking about is the deep and the waters. Now again, there's some similar things. The deep is meant to be thought of as this surging mass of unstable water, confusing water, but God was hovering over it all. All right? God was hovering over it all. And so when you read something like Psalm 93, this is the middle part of that. It's a short psalm. I probably should have just had the whole thing. But the floods have lifted up, O Lord. The floods have lifted up their voice. The floods lift up their waves. The Lord on high is mightier than the noise of many waters, than the many waves of the sea. That is saying the exact same thing as darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God brooded or hovered over the waters. In my opinion, that's what I'm trying to figure out how to get across, because when I'm reading the Bible in so many places, I see this as something that is so much deeper than what we give it credit for. Again, Psalm 69, deliver me out of the mire and let me not sink. Let me be delivered from those who hate me and out of the deep waters. Now, I could go on. Mire is kind of a Hebrew word that's kind of tied to the deep waters, but I'll forget about that. I won't chase that thread down right here. Let not the floodwater overflow me, nor let the deep swallow me up, and let not the pit shut its mouth against me. See, I think that those two, the darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the face of the waters. And then this next part, when God pulls and separates light and darkness, pulls the light out, is the basic template of all of the Bible, that we are given a chance to accept the light. And that's what it talks about in John 3. But anyway, let me move on. So then God said, let there be light, and there was light. Now, again, I could go in and go so far down some of these sidebars, but I'm not. I'm going to kind of talk about light, what light is. Right? So in the definition of light, there's a lot of things that go into this, but it literally means to be clear. It actually also means to be hot, but it has this sense of happiness, as it says here. That part right there. Now, if we take this, we look at it, it means to set on fire, to shine, to break forth. This actually also means kind of to break forth. That's what it means, the break of day, that it is the spark, the ignition. So God saw the light, and it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. So if we look at this and take kind of what, again, we know, this little word study of it, and use happiness and clarity for light, and then what we looked at for darkness before. So God saw the clarity and the joy, and it was good, and God separated that joy and clarity from the misery and destruction. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and morning were the first day. So again, looking at this, if God called the light day, what is the word day? All right, so day we're going to look at. And darkness he called night. We're going to look at night soon too. So day, again, means to be hot. It means it can mean birthday. It can mean, it can mean different times or whatever. But what it really kind of means is life. To break forth. Night, on the other hand, is probably more descriptive because day is a very broad brush term. Night means to twist away from the light, right? And if I take the root word of it, it's meant to be looked at as a winding staircase that folds back on itself. And even the root of that is called a loop. In Exodus 26 and Exodus 36, when it's talking about the curtains of the tabernacle, this is the only place that root word means the loop. It is the loops that connect the curtain. But that's what it's supposed to mean. Now, again, when we talk about John 3, where it says the light came into the world and the darkness fled, this is the description of it. So when we look at it again and we start putting what we know in or looked at, God called the happiness and clarity day, and the destruction and misery he called night. And evening and morning were the day one. And so when we say the happiness and clarity is day one, it means to be born or to be hot. The happiness and clarity burst forth and was hot. The misery and destruction he called night, and he called it that because it twists away from the light. It pulls itself away. And evening and morning were day one. I just think that there's so much more to this, and I could chase so many parts of this down, but I hope that makes sense. I will do one where we get into Genesis 1:6, because I really think this is the fall. This is where God separates Lucifer and the fallen world, the angels. And then after this, he's going to create what we think of as our universe, matter, and he's going to give Adam reign over it. And it's not matter at that point in time. It's a potential we call plasma. But then once we are expelled from the garden, then it becomes the real world. But I'm going to stop right there. And I just wanted to give you an idea of what kind of goes through my head. And see, I think there's so much more, especially to Genesis 1, than we give it credit for.